thank you, Konstantin, for joining and bearing with us. We had some difficulties with the technical part of this presentation, but we figured it out. So I'm very happy that Konstantin accepted the invitation, and he's going to give a presentation about his work working with the Earth observation data. Please, the stage is yours. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you everyone for showing up. And thanks for AI for inviting me. So I'm also a bit sick, so excuse my voice. I might have to take a sip of water here and there. But yeah, I'm here today talking about work that I did as postdoc at Microsoft Research, and I'm currently not at Microsoft, but I'm returning soon, so I'm a bit of a transition stage. So, but this work still mostly represents work that I did during my postdoc, and yeah, as already in the title, this work is on learning representations of the planet from Earth observation data, and hopefully we'll get more people here and everywhere more excited about working with Earth observation data. And I want to start the talk with this little video here. What you see here is a time lapse of objects in the lower Earth orbit since around the 1960s. And what you see in this video is the steady growth over the last 6 decades in these objects. Many of these lower Earth orbit objects are actually Earth observation satellites that sense our planet day by day and in near real time. And to me, this was always super fascinating and raised the question of what can you do with all of this real-time data of our planet? And as you see, as we reach the 2000s, it's getting quite crowded in here. And since we're a bit over time, I'm not going to let this run through all the way, but rest assured, there will be more and more objects in the 2020s and so on. Now, Earth observation data is often available publicly and in large quantities. And day by day, more and more satellites are launched to support Earth observation efforts and to monitor the planet. And I think to give you an example of the sheer scale of this type of data, let's just focus on the European Space Agency's Sentinel mission here, which is one of the primary sources for free optical Earth observation data. And if you just look at these few satellites here, which are part of the Sentinel mission, these alone produce around 1.6 terabytes of imagery per day. And for a quick comparison of how much that is, the data used to train GPT-3, so one of the later stage LLMs, was 45 terabytes worth of tokens. And so within a month, this ESA mission alone produces more data than that. And we're not just looking at satellite data. Large parts of the world's data have geographic metadata, like geographic location attached to it. And to show this quickly here, we've started with satellite images, but there's also stuff like geotagged social media quotes. And then there's things like completely derived products like an elevation map here. And my idea is to fuse these different data modalities together through their geospatial reference. And the reason for doing this is that I believe that combining different geospatial data can really help us to support all sorts of decision making. And to kind of highlight that example, here we have, again, this geotag tweet of a flooding event in Annapolis in the US. We can combine these kind of on-the-ground geospatial data with meteorological observations that come remotely from a satellite and fuse them together through their spatial and temporal reference and make a decision based on that. For example, does this flooding event and kind of this combined knowledge we have about this flooding event warrant an evacuation order, yes or no? Now, this seems pretty intuitive and raises the question, why isn't everyone using this kind of geospatial data for decision making? And there's a lot of different problems around this, but maybe I can summarize it in 3 problems that I see are the most crucial ones. And that is mostly geospatial data handling is difficult, and getting from data to decision can be really hard. The first big problem is the large scale of geospatial data, Earth observation data. I think I highlighted that with my example of the ESA satellites. The next big issue is that this data comes in all sorts of modalities. We have imagery, we have text, we have audio. All of these can be geospatial data, and it is often quite unstructured. And the last problem is that this data is often unlabeled, right? While we have a lot of remotely sensed data of our planet, there's no labels that are related to this. And often, if we want to obtain labels, this requires very difficult hand labeling. And in my research, I focus on a class of neural network models that will help us hopefully tackle this. And to overcome all of these different problems, I want to use different components. I already said neural networks, so this is kind of the part of the solution that should help with the large scale of this data, to help with the multi-modal nature and unstructuredness of the data. I want to leverage this geographic component, the metadata, and fuse these different modalities by location. And to help with the unlabeled component, I think we can leverage latest advances in self-supervised learning. And what I think can be done if we follow such an approach is that we truly unlock the potential of geospatial data. And what I hope to do in my research is to pioneer a new class of Earth AI models that I call geographic location encoders. So these are scalable neural network models that use self-supervised learning to learn semantic representations of our planet from Earth observation data. And I will, throughout this talk, kind of walk through building the first generation of these location encoders and how to use them in real-world scenarios. And yeah, I'm going to start with the spatial modeling part, then moving on to the definition of these location encoders. In part 3, I will talk a bit about how to train location encoders without labels, and lastly, kind of looking ahead at the future for Earth AI. But yeah, first, let me set the stage with kind of defining traditional spatial modeling and learning with geographic data. In geography, we have this really famous first law of geography that all things are related, but near things are more related. And what that basically boils down to is that geospatial data autocorrelated in space, and that this autocorrelation in space can be exploited. Values at new locations can be predicted by looking at nearby locations. For example, for a good temperature estimate at our current location, we can look at the closest available temperature sensors and compute some sort of weighted average based on that. And the weight we can make dependent on, for example, our distance to this sensor. And in traditional geostatistics, there's many ways to do this. The most famous one is one that is known as Gaussian processes in machine learning, and it's often referred to as kriging in quantitative geography. And that's basically, yeah, a traditional kernel-based method that allows you to learn a continuous function over your space, right? So you start with sparse observations in space, and you kind of learn a dense map. We have a problem with this, however, and that is traditional geostatistical methods like GPs have a few shortcomings that prevent the application to this kind of large-scale Earth observation data. First and foremost, they scale quite poorly, right? So Gaussian processes have cubic complexity, and while there's some work on, for example, deep Gaussian processes, this is still also kind of not very advanced work. Gaussian processes also are quite limited in their flexibility and can't really work well with complex data types like multispectral images. And lastly, Gaussian processes usually learn a continuous function in Euclidean space. However, with Earth observation data, we're moving on a sphere. And while there exist kernels that kind of count for spherical coordinates, it's still a difficult challenge. And now we're machine learning people, so our intuition might be that we can just replace the GP with a neural network, right? So you just throw a neural network at the data and everything is solved. However, this also has a few problems, right? Vanilla neural networks can also not process spherical coordinates very well. And the second problem with NNs is that they're not necessarily equipped to learn these kind of smooth spatial surfaces that we would want to see. So the idea of my work is to, maybe there's a way to kind of build specialized neural network architectures for this sort of geospatial data. And this is what I call the geographic location encoder. And just like with Gaussian processes, they aim to learn a continuous function over space, but unlike Gaussian processes, they can scale to high-dimensional data and work with complex data structures such as images. And yeah, again, goal is to learn this continuous function over space. And I will go into detail on the exact design of a location encoder in the next section. Location encoders also give us the flexibility to integrate them with other neural networks, spatialized for different inputs such as images. And this is the idea of geographic priors. For example, you might want to classify an image of an animal, and you also have the metadata of where that animal image was taken. And so you can use that as an Arctic prior, as a geographic prior. So here you have an image of an Arctic fox, and obviously Arctic foxes can only be found in certain latitudes around the planet. And so using that geographic information will actually give you a boost in accuracy. And geographic priors are relevant to many different real applications, from this kind of species classification task to soil carbon estimation or building segmentation. All right, let's move over to the second part of our work, which is based on our ICLR 2024 Spotlight. In this part, I will briefly show how location encoders have been designed in the past, and then introduce our new state-of-the-art method for location encoding. So this talk is not going to have a lot of math, but just quickly some formal definition of a geographic location encoder. It's any method that projects a GPS coordinate, so latitude-longitude coordinate pair, into a desired output space. And so we have coordinate C that represents longitude and latitude. And then the location encoder has this component PE, which is a positional encoding. You can think of it exactly as a positional encoding in transformers. In fact, that's what they're inspired by. And then a neural network on top of that positional encoding. Let's look at this positional encoding component first. The positional encoding is a purely functional transform that projects your two-dimensional latitude-longitude coordinate into a space that is more easily to deal with for a neural network. And the first kind of encodings we saw in 2015 was the simple one-hot encoding. So you can think about this as splitting your sphere, the planet Earth, into a grid of a certain size. And then for each of these grid cells, you have a value in your vector. And if your coordinate falls into that cell, you have a 1 activation, 0 in all other cells. So very simple one-hot geospatial encoding. In 2019, we had kind of the first more advanced encoding, and that's a very, very simple sinusoidal encoding. Again, very similar to how positional encodings work in transformers for language models. So very simple, you project your two-dimensional lat long to 4 dimensions, cosine lat, cosine long, sinus lat, sinus long. And then in most recent years, what we've seen is kind of multi-scale adaptations of this sinusoidal encoding method, basically by dividing your latitudes and longitudes by certain scale factors that allows you to get these sine, cosine, these periodic activations at different frequencies. This is what kind of the state of the art that we've seen established in 2020, also at ICLR. Now, this is the position encoding component. Now for the neural network component of the location encoder. This, throughout the last years, has remained mostly unchanged. Usually you just put a simple MLP or a fully connected network on top of your positional encoding. And yeah, not a lot of innovation there recently. The existing location encoders that we have, or that we had before our paper, have had 2 major shortcomings. First and foremost, their performance falls off drastically around the poles. And the reason for that is that the spherical space diverges the most around the poles from the kind of assumed Euclidean space of these sinusoidal transforms around the poles. So you'll always see worse performance around there. And the second problem is that these kind of simple neural networks that we have seen are not necessarily well equipped to learn spatial dependencies and, again, these kind of smooth spatial patterns. And so what we've done in our work is we've introduced a new position encoding based on spherical harmonics, and we've introduced a new neural network to learn these location encoders with a sinusoidal representation network. So I'm going to talk about both of these components. First, the spherical harmonics component. Spherical harmonics are widely used in geodesics and fluid dynamics to model our planet. And in the little function you see here, like you don't need to look too deeply into it, but this kind of p bar represents the associated Legendre polynomials that approximate the highest frequency harmonic m of a function. And these, while there's no closed form solution for spherical harmonics, we can actually analytically pre-compute these Legendre polynomials and get a much faster computation. So that means we already get like a really good positional encoding based on what people are doing in geodesics and physics to help with our location encoding. That's kind of the first innovation that we've done. Second innovation is that there's a nice theorem that says any function on the sphere we can approximate by a weighted sum of these spherical harmonics that we've just computed. So now the question becomes, how can we learn the weights for this these spherical harmonics? And obviously our solution here is to use a neural network. But to learn a better, sorry, one slide ahead, but to learn a better smooth spatial pattern, we use a new neural network type, and that's the sinusoidal representation network. These are simple MLPs with a sign activation function, and they have been shown to be extremely efficient at learning neural implicit representations in 3D vision. So kind of a similar idea where you learn a continuous function over space. And yeah, that way we end up with a weighted sum of spherical harmonics, and we have both the positional encoding and the neural network component of our location encoder. Now let's put these things together. We can use a location encoder like a Gaussian process or other interpolation methods and learn these kind of continuous surfaces or maps in spherical space. So here we take these locations forward, compute our spherical harmonics, and learn a function. In this case, for example, very simple land-ocean classification, right? So here we just sample 10,000 points on the sphere randomly and assign each point one value if it's on land and a 0 value otherwise. And from that kind of sparse observation, our location encoder can learn a dense map of land oceans just like that. Now let's look into the different components of our new location encoder separately to kind of see how much they contribute each to performance gains. First of all, siren neural nets are much better than existing linear or fully connected backbones for learning spatial patterns. You can see that here again with this kind of land-ocean classification, right? So on the top you can see a spherical harmonics position encoding, but using a very simple linear neural network. And on the bottom you see the spherical harmonics position encoding, but this time with the siren network. Right, and so these have roughly the same number of parameters. Obviously, the sign activation function is a bit more computation extensive to compute, but you get this much more accurate map. The L values you see here, this again corresponds to the number of Legendre polynomials used, right? So the more Legendre polynomials you're going to use for positional encoding, the better your spatial resolution is going to be. And that's where you can see that with L20, you get kind of the most accurate map. Now let's look at the spherical harmonics component. And I want you to focus here on, again, the polar regions where I said that current sinusoidal methods often fail. And what we can see here is that spherical harmonics outperforms existing positional encodings, especially in these polar areas, right? So here we have a siren neural network with a spherical harmonics and positional encoding on the bottom, and on the top in blue, we have one of these existing sinusoidal positional encodings. And the little red and white spots you see there, these hotspots are where we have like a high probability of observing the Arctic fox. And obviously what you can see here is that the sinusoidal, the currently based methods have many more artifacts in areas where we cannot find Arctic foxes, like in Africa and Southern Europe. Whereas our siren and spherical harmonics method shows way fewer of those artifacts. And we also show this in a different experiment, which I'm not going to go into too much, but basically our red line that I'm showing here is our spherical harmonics positional encoding. And you see that these existing methods grid and sphere C, which are both sinusoidal methods, fall off drastically around the poles. Great. So far we've discussed how to design state-of-the-art location encoders and then how to train them directly with an output for spatial interpolation. In the next part of my talk, I want to focus on pre-training location encoders with unlabeled Earth observation data and how this can improve modeling and especially spatial extrapolation. And why do we need this step? The step, and that is that in the real world, we often don't just want to do interpolation, but we want to do extrapolation. And spatial extrapolation describes the problem when we want to make predictions geographically far from our training set. And here, we cannot rely on this first law of geography, pure interpolation, but we need to do something else. And I believe that location encoders offer a unique opportunity to overcome this long-standing problem in spatial modeling. And the reason for that is the following. Earth observation datasets do usually provide global coverage. We observe the whole planet, and assuming that Earth observation data is generally relevant to our task, this data might be able to help us. For example, Earth observation data captures many different ground conditions such as vegetation or climate or even socioeconomic factors like the built environment. And to outline this intuition, the question is, can we pre-train location encoders on globally available Earth observation data to help models extrapolate into new areas downstream? And the idea then is to pre-train our location encoder and plug it into our prediction problem so that we fine-tune our location encoder on the actual task. But we don't start with kind of random neural network weights at the beginning, but we already have some sort of intuition of how this location is characterized. And to kind of highlight this intuition a bit more, I have a little game. Obviously, that little game doesn't work so well in like an online talk. This is like made for an in-person talk where people can actually play with me. But I will just kind of walk you through the intuition here. And to best explain this, the premise of this game is, can you tell me at which location around the world this satellite image was taken? And I want you to question your intuition. What in this image gives you a clue about the location? What features can we focus on to make that call? And turns out that the true location of this image is somewhere in northern Canada, in the Arctic. And now the question arises if we can train a location encoder to actually know where this image was taken. And turns out that if we look at specific characteristics of the image, we can do this, right? So for example, in this image, we see in the top left, we see a little white field that might look like a snow patch that gives us a clue. We then have this kind of rugged terrain that might remind us of a glacial moraine. And then we also see a coastline. And all of those clues together give us an indication about where this image is. And it turns out we can train a neural network to do the same and get really close in the prediction. And now this is the intuition. Now let's put this into practice. Here we have a data set of Sentinel-2 data images, so satellite images with corresponding locations. They're distributed approximately uniformly over landmass. And to kind of follow this intuition of predicting where a location is, we use a contrastive objective to learn without labels and to match locations with corresponding images. This way, our model learns location-specific features like the ones I just talked about that we can then use downstream. And the intuition here is you feed your images through an image encoder, your locations through a location encoder, and then you have your contrastive image location matching objective. Now, this will look familiar to many of you, and that's right. This is basically the CLIP objective, except that we don't do image text matching, we do image location matching. And like I said, downstream, we can then take forward this pre-trained location encoder that hopefully has learned something meaningful about a location and obtain embeddings for any given location on the planet and integrate these embeddings in any downstream task. And the idea here, again, is that with this clip objective, image and location embeddings are aligned, and so image embeddings are transferred into the location encoder. Now, does this actually work? Turns out it works quite well, and we are really excited about this. So our method, which we call setclip, does work quite well. And to highlight this, I brought a very simple regression classification task here. So again, like before, we sample 10,000 points around the planet, and this time we don't classify that into landmass or no landmass, but we classify it into the different biomes of our planet. So these are different ecological areas of our planet. And now we again want to predict. We build the dense map from the few observations we have. And if we do this with a not pre-trained location encoder, just kind of vanilla location encoder, we get kind of good here, right? But not like super good, right? So we get to around 83% accuracy. If we plug in our pre-trained location encoder, our setclip location encoder, we get to a much better map. And so we can really see that this pre-training approach has taught the location encoder something about locations that is meaningful. Now, obviously, this is still an interpolation task, right? We still sample these points all around the world, so I haven't really tackled the extrapolation problem I was talking about yet. And to highlight why I think setclip can help with extrapolation, I want to kind of play this game again. So here we have another image of a satellite image of a specific location, and we again want to see where this image lies. Let's see. This is the true location. This model is in the this image is in the Arizona desert. However, this time our model is actually quite off with its prediction. It predicts this this image to be in a desert in the Middle East. But this is actually not a failure mode of the model. This is the model working exactly as intended. Because setclip here predicts a different location because both of these locations have very similar visual features. Now, what this can actually do is tell us which areas around the world are looking similar. And then we can use a model trained on similar areas to make better predictions at our target unseen location. Again, using this kind of similarity search. And to highlight this similarity search, I brought another figure here, which shows us similarity in our embedding space between two anchor locations and all of the rest of the world. So on the left side, we have a location in the Congo Basin. And obviously, other locations in the Congo Basin are the most similar to that location. But we see that also other tropical kind of jungle locations like in the Amazon or around Indonesia have a high similarity. On the right side of the figure, you see an anchor location on the US East Coast. And again, we see that other locations on the US East Coast are the most similar, but we can also see that areas in like say moderate climate, Central Europe, or in Japan and on the Eastern Chinese coast are also very similar visually. And what this can really do is that the setclip embeddings can help us to transfer a model to unseen areas. And to highlight this, here's a little example where we few-shot learn ecoregions. Ecoregions are basically smaller classifications of biomes using our setclip location encoder. So here on the very left side of the figure, let me show you. Here's my laser pointer. Here on the very left side, you see the map of our test set, which is Africa. So all of Africa is unknown, except these little black anchor locations where we have some training data available. So basically, we do a few-shot learning setting where we train on the rest of the world and predict on Africa. And turns out that this task is quite difficult for a lot of these existing location encoders, but setclip actually proves best at this. And it's important to note here that our competition doesn't necessarily use satellite images for their pre-training. So GeoClip, which was a model from NURBS last year, uses Flickr images, so social media images. Mosaics also uses satellite images, and then CSP uses iNaturalist images, which are animal species. Our model can also help in development settings. So this is a very relevant setting in the real world, where often models are trained on Western data and then fail when they are deployed in low-income countries. For example, in building segmentation, which means finding all the buildings in an image, we often have models that are trained on data in the US, where buildings are usually rectangular, they're arranged in a regular gridded shape, and they're well spaced out. Then when we transfer the model to, for example, a country like Somalia, where buildings are much smaller and irregular shaped, these models fail. Now, the intuition here is that SACLIP has seen both of these areas, both Somalia and the US, even if it was without labels, it can help building segmentation models translate from one to the other area by accessing images in the training data that are most similar to this test area. And this application is something we did actually at Microsoft. So I can't share too many results about this, but this actually helped improve an internal model we had at Microsoft. And it's not just ourselves that ran successful tests with SACLIP, it's also other researchers. So people have been quite quick to adapt SACLIP and to identify more use cases for it. Here, for example, for image generation models that use satellite images and to make them better at capturing location-specific characteristics. So this is GeoSynth, which is a diffusion model for satellite images. And on the right side here, you can see 4 different images that are columns of 4 different locations for which we generate satellite images with the same building mask, right? So on the bottom, you have a building mask conditioning. And for all of these locations, we have the same building mask as a conditioning to generate the image, but we have a different location, right? And so you'll see actually quite a few differences. And if you focus on the columns for Boulder, Colorado and Des Moines, Iowa, you see that Boulder looks much drier than Des Moines. And this is actually one of these ground conditions that SACLIP captures, right? So SACLIP has seen that Des Moines is quite a lot more humid than Boulder, Colorado. And so it kind of transfers this in this image. And the further highlight, I think, from this paper is that it really shows how cheap and easy to use SACLIP is, right? It's just a small location encoder, and it brings this kind of general geo-conditioning. Now, to kind of end the talk, I want to talk a bit about where we go from here with GeoAI and specifically with location encoders. And what I want to posit first and foremost is that I truly believe that geographic location encoders are a new kind of class of geographic foundation model, and that they have this potential for global coverage and the design that focuses on this kind of general purpose use. And if I were to kind of draw the timeline up until 2030, what makes me really excited about this research is that I think they're both very short-term and long-term ambitions for working with geographic location encoders. First and foremost, I think geo-embeddings are a very cheap and potentially super impactful alternative to actually using full satellite images. So for example, the satellite image for a given location is 13 channels, it's multispectral, and then whatever your height and width is. Your SACLIP embedding for a given location is just 256 characters long, so it's just one vector, and it might still provide very similar kind of features depending on what your downstream task is. And especially in low resource settings, this can be crucially important. There is very clear next steps for building kind of better and more capable location encoders. We can integrate more modalities of Earth observation data, right? So we can integrate maybe radar data. Currently, SACLIP only uses optical. We can use radar data. We can use kind of derived products like vegetation indices. We can use data at different resolutions, right? So we have satellites with all sorts of different resolutions available and can get these kind of multi-resolution location encoders ready. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, we also have satellite images over time. So we can build these models that can take also time as an input, like you see here, and not just space. In the medium term, I think what is really exciting about location encoders is that they work in an embedding space and that they can be fused together with other foundation models quite easily. And I think I want to really use this to improve the geospatial intelligence of large language models. And that is not really amazing I want to show here with to be fair, a bit of a cherry-picked example, but I've encountered this kind of problems with LLMs quite a lot, that they really struggle with geospatial queries. So here I asked the LLM for the annual mean temperature at a given location in the middle of the Pacific. And obviously it might not know that temperature there, right? But it should at least be able to find the nearest location and give me the distance to that location and the mean temperature there. And this is what it tries to do, except it gets that distance calculation completely wrong. It basically tells me that the closest location to here, somewhere in the Philippines, when Hawaii is much closer. And so I believe that location encoders have this potential to be aligned in the embedding space with other encoders like and other foundation models like vision models and text models to really improve all of them. And we're seeing kind of the first exciting prototypes of this, like new GIS tools that allow you to directly interact with a satellite image through text prompts. So for example, in this tool, you can just type in the word tree, and then the model will be able to recognize that, translate it into an object, and find that object on the map. So that's quite exciting, as it can potentially make these GIS tools much more accessible through this natural language interface. Finally, I think all my work raises a big question, and that is, can you actually learn physical and environmental processes of the planet from data alone using neural networks? And if so, can this help us identify and track changes to our planet? And can this even help with scientific discovery and kind of projecting trends forward, like climate change being the obvious application here? And I think the answer to this is very unclear, but I think working towards this ambition with all these kind of intermediate steps I just talked about will help us design better AI for the planet and design and inform the design of tools that we build. And I also firmly believe that for this ambitious and cross-cutting agenda to be successful, we need to work by some guiding principles. And these principles, me and some colleagues have outlined in a recent ICML position paper, and I want to end my talk with a call to anyone interested in the intersection of AI and Earth observation data to join me and many colleagues in establishing geospatial machine learning as its own subdiscipline within the ML community. There are many unique methodological challenges that Earth observation data poses, and that people in machine learning have the skills to tackle. And yeah, if you want to learn more about this field generally and kind of these open research questions, I recommend you check out our ICML position paper led by Professor Esther Rolfe at Boulder, Colorado. And the two papers I presented you can find here. I want to quickly thank my amazing collaborators. Beyond Esther, there's Mark in Wageningen, Robin and Davis at EPFL, Caleb at Microsoft, and Lester also at Microsoft. And I think we have some time for questions, hopefully. Thanks everyone for coming, and yeah, excited to hear what questions you have.
So maybe if it's okay, I'll start with a question.
Of course.
And everybody, you can raise your hand or just we'll call on you. So did you notice any evidence, because from the sort of like Pangea state of the Earth, like before the continental drift, of things kind of being similar along coastlines or like matching geographical features? Was the model able to capture any of that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It didn't come through well, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question is, since the continents did drift apart at a certain point, there are like sort of matching features across geographical space in some cases. I was wondering if the model caught any of that, or the same thing with like large human migrations, I guess.
Yeah, not that I have seen. I haven't looked really into this, but I think one important thing is that, well, there's two things. First, the model is kind of restrained by the time frame we trained it on. So we sampled all our images between 2020 and 23, I think. So it's only data from within those years. And effectively, we are averaging over time, right? Because a given location kind of has the same probability to appear in one of these years and in like one of these months. So these kind of temporal changes like human migration that are more long-term, this current model will not capture. And then for these kind of continental drift features, so I haven't really looked into this. If the features are pronounced enough, as in they are on a large enough scale, I think our model would capture that. If they are on like a much smaller scale, these kind of current iterations of SACLIP will not capture that. I think like a rough way to think about this is that SACLIP embeddings change over around the range of 50 kilometers. This is where you kind of see substantial change. On smaller scales than that, you will not see much change in your embeddings. So what they are really useful for is this kind of grounding in geographic grounding according to kind of large area effects rather than these kind of really specialized and really small scale effects.
That makes sense. Thank you. I think there's a question from Ruslan. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the presentation. My question is specifically about the SACLIP embedding. I'm interested in knowing like how can it be used in downstream tasks, especially around environment or agriculture. So I was thinking about something like drought monitoring or drought prediction, let's say across larger scale like Europe. So typically, what would be like we do have some environmental data or we have some satellite imagery data. How does this embedding can fit into our modeling and what would be like a way of modeling this problem with the embedding? So do we build a data fusion model or we will use only the embedding? So yeah, I mean, if you can highlight of the downstream task, especially around environment or agriculture, it would be very useful.
Yeah, so the SACLIP location encoder is super easy to use. You basically just plug in a location, latitude, longitude coordinate, and you get in return this 265 character embedding. And that embedding you can then kind of freely use in your models. You can concatenate that, for example, with image features, or you can find some other way of integrating it. I will say, for us, this is kind of an active area of research, how to best integrate it with existing models, especially if you kind of fuse it together with other more complex data, like image or text data. We have not really looked into kind of best practices there. So far, we've mostly done concatenation in the embedding space, which seemed to work fine for the most part. And then, yeah, again, I think the main question whether our embeddings are going to be useful is going to be whether the locations that you have are actually significantly different as captured by satellite images. And in that case, SACLIP embeddings will hopefully be able to help you with your environmental task, as the model will be able to kind of tell different areas apart from one another by their visual signature, which then helps your model to kind of learn different submodels based on location.
I think if there are no more questions, I will ask one question. It's mostly about geospatial encoder. Do you think it would be useful integrating it in scientific purposes, more like combining it with climate data? I know people are working with clouds, and I can't give more example, but sort of in that direction.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one we don't really have the answer for. I think at the core of this question is the super big question of whether we can, just from Earth observation data alone, recover physics of our planet and kind of scientific processes of our planet. And this is an unanswered question because we have never in the past really been able to process Earth observation data at the scale we have now. And so I think we probably can recover some processes, right? So, for example, we will be able to recover certain weather phenomena. We will probably be able to discover long-term planetary trends like climate change just from Earth observation data. right? Why we can't, like, if we say we have just optical data, we cannot see temperature rising, but we can see glaciers melting. We can see I don't know, maybe drier areas, humid areas become more dry and so on. So we will be able to capture some of these effects. And so I would really love to see models like SACLIP, and especially kind of the future iterations that are more powerful, to be used for these kind of ML weather models or ML climate models, and see if they if actually looking at satellite images and integrating that leads to some sort of improvement. But I think this is like a completely open research field, and one of the many areas I want to go into. But like with many things in this area, prioritizing what I will do, and it's just so hard because there's 100 cool directions I could think of going towards.
Yeah, just to add, I also remember working with magnetometers, which are scattered around the.
Yep.
So I think that's also whether that's possible to be integrated and whether it would help.
Yeah, maybe to make that clear again, SACLIP currently is just optical satellite imagery, right? So this is
yes,
12.
I understand.
Yeah, it's just 12 optical channels, right? We completely ignore stuff like what you said. We ignore radar at this point. So there's so many more possibilities there.
And I think there is another question. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Yep. Hi. So you alluded to your a kind of a hierarchical embedding based model in which you select a lower embedding based on a higher level embedding, and like, so I just wanted to know, like, how does it compare to the deep learning based approaches by DeepMind or by Carnegie Mellon, by Anima's team? So, like, how does that kind of compare?
So I'm not sure I understand the question fully, but so correct me if I'm, or like just reply if I didn't answer it yet. But the competing methods that exist to SACLIP are basically other methods that do this kind of contrastive pre-training of location encoders that basically do location image matching. So that would be GeoClip, which uses cell phone images basically, and CSP, which also uses and one satellite image dataset and one natural animal image dataset. So those exist using the exact same framework. And then there's a few other methods that also give you features based on location only. And this is mosaics first and foremost, which gives you random features based on satellite images of a location, just random convolutional features. And then there's one very recent from DeepMind, yes. I don't know if that's the one you mentioned, but that just came out a few weeks ago. I haven't really checked that paper, so I'm really, they compared to SATCLIP and they actually beat SATCLIP in pretty much everything, which is great to see, right? I want to see more people work on location encoders, but I can't say too much about their work. But basically, yeah, so we compare to any model that only takes location as input, right? No images, just latitude, longitude. And then the hierarchical aspect, I think we also don't really think much about that. The only thing I can say there again is the kind of resolution of SACLIP currently is quite restrained, as we kind of focus on capturing these more higher level features that kind of classify whether an area falls into a certain climate zone or the kind of terrain that we can find there. I don't know. Please let me know if I missed part of your question.
No, I think so. You answered it quite satisfactorily. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. I think we don't have any questions, and we are at the end of our time. Again, apologies for the rusty beginning, but we got there, and I really appreciate Konstantin coming and telling us. It was really interesting. So I think we're going to end here. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Konstantin, for presenting.
Thank you.